we on
I
video?
pushed a button. Yeah,
Oh.
we're on video. Yeah.
All right. Hey, everybody.
All right.
I would have done this and worn a nicer shirt if I knew we were.
Oh man.
All right.
You know what?
There
We're
you go.
doing it casual today. I've got a T-shirt on.
All right. So you want me to?
All right. Well,
do my cue?
give me that intro if you would.
Hi, this is Rob Neyer, and you are watching the Break It Down show.
One of many times. Thanks, Providence. We go back a good number of years now. Are you still the commissioner of the West Coast League?
I am still the commissioner. Shockingly, I just hit my 6-year anniversary a couple weeks ago, or am about
That's
to.
right.
Yep.
And will you retain the title commissioner for the rest of your life?
That's an interesting question. I think that typically this sort of job, you either do it for a year or two and you or someone else realizes that you are ill-suited for the job, or if you can make it past that point, you've got a pretty good shot of doing it for about as long as you want to do it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I'm kind of in the middle still. I don't know what is going to happen, but I certainly wouldn't mind turning this into my last full-time job.
And the reorganization of the minor leagues that Major League Baseball did, that seems to me that if you're entrepreneurial and positive, they've created an opportunity for the independent leagues. I mean, because there's, I don't know, just less minor league teams. There's less rounds of draft, and so it seems like you guys can do your job and out hustle. You're working in the fringes still, but the fringes, in my mind, have gotten a lot larger.
No, I think that's absolutely true. It's it reminds me a little bit of what has happened in the journalism business, where there are fewer opportunities with the big boys, some of which don't even exist anymore. But if your goal is just to work or to build a baseball team, there might be more opportunities now because the barrier for entry is not as high as it once was. So a great example, there are many more summer collegiate leagues and teams today than there were just 10 years ago. Now, our league's been around for 20 years. And I think when I started, we had 11 teams, maybe 12. I'd have to go back and look. We're going to have 17 in 2025. And there are still a few markets here in the Pacific Northwest that I think are perfectly appropriate, not for a AAA team or a AA team, but a collegiate summer team, sure. And with the contraction of the minor leagues, there are only 6 teams in the Northwest League. There used to be 8 or 10, I think 8 for a long time, and now there are only 6. So you think about it, we have 1 AAA team, 6 Class A teams, 1 major league team, and then otherwise you've got independent ball. Actually, we don't have any independent ball per se in the Northwest. Really, nothing real that's sort of major. But a lot of collegiate summer teams, not only my league, but some sort of subsidiary operations as well. In total, there must be 25 roughly collegiate summer teams just in the Northwest. So you're right.
Yeah. And it seems like with Major League Baseball being so set on patterns, spin rate, the kind of swing you can have, if you're a player that doesn't fit into that mold, or maybe you're still a year or two behind in development, or just don't fit in with the team that drafts you's philosophy, again, there's this platform where you can go play for a whole host of teams and maybe even specifically target a certain team that has the guy who focuses on whatever that thing is, the Tijuana slider. You're like, yeah, that guy, you got to go to Portland for that. And they have that guy there. And so there's still that gateway. Like we look at someone like Ichiro, who just like, you look at that swing, you're like, why would you teach someone this swing? You never would, but look at him. He's a Hall of Fame caliber player.
I think that in addition to a lot more opportunities for people who want to build teams, there are more opportunities for players to play, whether it's in collegiate summer ball or in an independent minor league. as you know, there are only 120 minor league teams. The major league draft, the June draft, the amateur draft, lasts only 20 rounds now. Whereas it wasn't that long ago that some teams would draft 54 players in one draft. Now they wouldn't sign all those players, but I would say essentially twice as many players at least were drafted 20, 25, 30 years ago as are drafted now. Now, players who aren't drafted can still sign free agent contracts with affiliated teams or with major league organizations and play for an affiliated team. But it is true that there are many fewer opportunities with affiliated teams than there used to be. But more opportunities for independent teams. In addition to the Collegiate Summer League leagues that I mentioned, there are also independent leagues all over the country, really, except for here in the Pacific Northwest, where there really aren't any. But there are lots of others that sort of filled in the gaps of markets both before the minor league contraction and now after. In fact, Major League Baseball made some substantive efforts to help markets that lost affiliated teams get independent teams. So those opportunities are there. I think the one thing that you could argue is missing for players now who want pro careers is, it's kind of odd because for a long time, the teaching in minor league baseball, the development piece was real spotty. Some organizations did a really good job, some did not. Their real focus was just on finding jobs for ex-major league players, whether they were good teachers, good coaches, or not. Now I think that's flipped to at least some degree, where the coaching is better. Certainly they have all the technology now in all the affiliated parks, TrackMan and Kinetrax, whatever the name of that fancy camera is, Edgertronic, all those things that we've read about. That I think is what's missing. If you go to an independent team, say, I'm just going to throw a name out there, the Pioneer League, and not to throw shade at the Pioneer League. For all I know, they have all this stuff too, but I don't think they have what you would have in an affiliated league. So if you don't get drafted, say you would have gotten drafted in the 26th round 15 years ago, well, now you don't get drafted and you're not quite good enough, perhaps, for a major league team to sign you as a free agent. Well, you can find some place to play, but what is that environment going to look like? How much of the work do you have to do as opposed to the coaching staff and the analytical staff, which might not even exist on that team? So there are more opportunities to play. I'm not sure there are as many opportunities to improve, which of course is what every pro ball player wants to do, because they're almost all targeting the major leagues, whether they were drafted in the first round or they would have been drafted in the 50th 20 years ago.
Right. And when you have, and I'll just use your league and just talk about Yakima, that's a place that was traditionally an affiliated team, and they've lost that. And so now they're in your guys' league. So what do those towns do? And I'm using Yakima. There's a bunch of places that lost their teams. What is your sense for how that has been for these smaller towns that lost their affiliation?
Well, there are a couple of ways to look at that. One is there's the Yakima situation, and there are many others. Walla Walla is another team in our league, my league, that the Walla Walla Padres existed for a while. They were also a Phillies farm team back in the early 80s, I think. So I think in those cases, when teams lost their affiliation, there was a sense that I'm sure there were some ill feelings there, but I think in many cases there was a sense that this market just cannot support an affiliated team in this league. Whether maybe the ballpark isn't up to standards, which were pretty loose until very recently, or the attendance just isn't there. I know that with the case of Yakima, that organization, the ownership group, wound up here where I am now in the Portland, Oregon area. They're the Hillsboro Hops. Hillsboro is a suburb to 10, 15 miles west of downtown Portland. It's right over the ridge from where I live, actually. It's a relatively quick drive for me. But they saw a tremendous opportunity in the Portland area because of the market, and they left. I think if people were upset with how that happened, they were upset not with baseball, but with the ownership group who didn't do what they would have needed to do to stay there.
Right.
Now, what happened a few years ago is different because MLB came in and said, hey, we had 160 teams, and now we're going to have 120. So that's 40 that just have to go, regardless of how well the market supports it. They cut teams because the stadium was old and couldn't be upgraded quickly. They cut places because there were transportation issues. Pioneer League being a great example of that. You know, nobody wants 12-hour bus rides week in, week out. There are still a few of those, especially in the Northwest League, but they're very rare now. Those long bus rides. So that whole league went away, basically. And so I think it's a different situation. And I know there was a lot of ill will. There are a few cities. I want to say Fresno was one of them. Filed lawsuits against Major League Baseball for contracting the minor leagues. But again, whether it was because of PR or whatever else, whatever the other reasons, if any, were, MLB did make an effort to make things right in those markets that lost teams. And in the long run, getting back to your original question, I love these questions. Nobody asks me these questions. I've been a commissioner for 6 years, and I sort of have a little experience now in how these things work. But I don't get to talk about this stuff. So it's exciting for me.
And we're not close to done. I got more.
But ultimately, it turns out that for the most part, most fans, I don't want to say they don't know the difference, because I think most of them do know the difference between, say, Class A, the Northwest League, and a collegiate summer league like the West Coast League. I just think most fans don't care much. What they're after is that the experience of going to a game on a lovely June or July evening and just hanging out for a few hours and watching a baseball game. And all the better if it's fairly cheap entertainment, which it is. You know, a baseball game in our league anyway, you can get in, it's cheaper than going to a movie. The concessions are cheaper, the tickets are cheaper. It's a little more relaxed. Not to say I don't love going to movies, because I do, but it's this level of baseball is a great value, and I think that's what most fans appreciate, is just having some place to go in their city. You know, do they care who wins? A little bit, sure. They cheer for their home team. Do they look at the standings every day like we do if we're a major league? No, they don't. Most of them have no idea if the team is in first place or fourth place. They might get a little excited at the end of the season if there's a playoff race, and they might come to the playoff games, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, what people want, if they care at all, is they want baseball. And unless you're talking about MLB and the famous players that you see on TV, the actual quality of play, how much money the players are making, if any, in our case, they don't make any money. That's kind of beside the point. So for the most part, places like Walla Walla and Bend, there's another one in our league, used to be in the Northwest League, and Yakima, Bellingham, yet another, Victoria, the fans don't really concern themselves a whole lot with that. Once they have baseball, they tend to be pretty happy.
Yeah. And baseball is one of those things where the parks are so distinct that when you go there, if you went on like a West Coast League tour and went up to the area and just spent, 10 days going to 10 different ballparks, you'd have wonderful experiences. I mean, these have to be beautiful places for the most part. I mean, it's a beautiful part of the country, and it's just neat. I need to go experience that. I've seen a number of indie league games, and even if it's just like the post team's yard and they're playing out of there, it's awesome. It's really neat because you have so much access to everything.
No, it really is one of my favorite things about. I probably said this before, but I think my two favorite things about being the commissioner are, and I should have had one handy, is getting my name on the baseball. I like to hold it up. It's a lot of fun. My signature on the baseball is that I still get a kick out of that. But the best part of the job is getting to travel around and visit all the different ballparks.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
believe, and I know that I'm biased, I would be surprised if there were a league anywhere in the country with prettier locations than we have.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Port Angeles, um, on one side of the stadium, basically a few blocks away, is the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and on the other side is Olympic National Park. You can see the Hurricane Ridge in the park above the right field fence in the distance, and there are so many just beautiful locations in our league, beautiful cities, beautiful hills and rivers. It really is an amazing set of markets that we have in this league.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is one of the best things about all of that. The other tier of baseball, because if you go to a Major League Baseball game, and I'm going to go visit a bunch of parks the next week. Actually, I'll be in the next 30 days. I'll be in 4, possibly 5 different ball yards, right?
Wow.
And it's expensive. It is expensive, and I'm like, whew. You get deals from people. You get a friend that can get you things, and because if you pay full freight and you bring 2 people, it's not hard to spend $200 a person at a baseball game. And sure, you can spend less, but man, you've got to really work at it. But meanwhile, you have these indie leagues, and there's all kinds of players. I'm curious, what is your league's responsibility? And you guys are college, so maybe there's a different thing here, but what is your league's responsibility to connect to Major League Baseball, to be a platform to say, hey, don't forget about Shane Bieber or whoever it's going to be that's in the league that potentially graduates, or you need to get them noticed to get them out of your league and to the next league, whatever that league is?
Most of our teams prioritize the development of their players and making sure they have as much exposure as possible. For example, we have a league-wide video streaming platform. So every single one of our games, unless we have a technical glitch at some point in the day or the evening, which does happen occasionally, but for the most part, all of our games are on the streaming platform. So their coaches, their parents, scouts, anyone who wants can check in. Our league has TrackMan, which is for those who don't know, it's a radar. It's a radar that sits behind the plate and tracks the speed and the break, spin rate of every pitch, et cetera, et cetera. We have something called Synergy, which is a system of 6 or 8 cameras all around the stadium that take video of basically the pitchers from many angles, and all these things ultimately wind up being purchased, all this data, by Major League Baseball teams. So that's a high priority for us, is making sure that our players have the maximum amount of exposure. Our All-Star game is coming back this season after being away for a while, and we'll have 25, 30 plus scouts there to see our best players. So yeah, it's a big deal. And I think that our teams have emotional commitments to doing that. It's always been in the fabric of the league, is developing young players. I would say half of our teams right now have at some point had players who were the sons or the nephews of the owners. So they are involved on a personal level in these things as well. And also, frankly, it helps our recruiting if we can demonstrate to the players' college coaches that, hey, if your guys come here, they will be treated well. They will have all this technology around them. We will create an environment that allows them to thrive and develop and be seen. So yeah, it's a big part of what we do. Nobody is in our league to make $1 million.
Right.
Not to say that anybody wants to lose money. Everybody would rather make a little money with their teams, but just having been in it for 6 years, that isn't really what motivates most of our people. If it were, they'd go do something else. There are a lot of better ways to make money than run a summer collegiate team.
Yeah, yeah. When you look at Rob Manfred and what he has to do for his league, much more complex and all of its like locations and international things going on. Do you empathize? Do you recognize when you compare your role as a commissioner to what he must have to go through? I mean, surely somebody's like that damn Commissioner Neyer, and they're mad and they shake their fist at you or whatever it is. But how do you compare, contrast what your jobs are?
One of the things that I realized fairly early on was that the job would be more similar to an MLB commissioner's job than I would have guessed. Only because the heart, I think, of the job, and I think it's less true now than it used to be when MLB had 20 employees or whatever, as opposed to the hundreds. There are so many layers of people between Rob Manfred and most of what goes on in MLB. But really, what it ultimately comes down to is working with the people who have the actual money, i.e., the owners, taking their temperature, trying to find a consensus or build a consensus to push things forward a little bit. Sometimes something takes 2 or 3 years, even at my level, to sort of go from, hey, here's an idea that I think would be good. I just talked to 3 people who agree with me, but there's these other 12 people who don't yet, or who don't think it's important enough to move. How do we get those people on our side to, I hate to use the word progressive because it now has sort of negative connotations for a lot of people, but I think of the job as being progressive in the sense that there are always a few things that seem like if we could just do this, it would be a little better for the league as a whole. Now, how do we get there? And I think that's always been the commissioner's job or the league president's job, whether it's Major League Baseball or a little league. Little leagues have the same issues that the owners aren't as rich. There aren't any owners, but you have to deal with the parents, right, and the coaches. I have in my role, because we don't have a huge staff. In fact, it's basically just me and a couple of people who work part time with me. I work with 13 directors plus a few of their co-owners. I work with 16 general managers, some of the people who work for them. So it gets into the multiple dozens of people that I work with on a day-to-day basis or week to week. I don't know that that's true for Rob Manfred at this point because he has so many lieutenants and different for all his different departments. But when I've read books written by league executives, whether it was Miles Wolff, who was involved with various independent leagues over the years, or whether commissioners prior to Manfred, there are a lot of things that they do that I can relate to and recognize.
You're describing a vibrant, complex job that mimics the job at the top of your industry's, tiers. This tells me that is baseball thriving or is dying, right? And there's all these people that always want to kill baseball and flip the switch on it. But it seems to me that if you're running a league of college players, international, because you got teams all scattered around Canada,
right,
that baseball is thriving. And I don't want to make too bold of a statement there because there's going to be ways to be like, yeah, but it's also struggling too. But let's talk about the ways that baseball is thriving, and then maybe we can come back and pour some doom and gloom down the drain as well.
I mean, I don't have any doom and gloom. I think that it's easy to recognize potential issues. I think that in the world of Major League Baseball, the biggest question mark right now in terms of the business model seems to be the TV broadcast revenues. But I also think they're going to solve those problems. They'll figure something out. It just seems like they're throwing enough resources at this thing that and people aren't going to stop wanting to watch the Dodgers. And they might have to watch it in a different place, but
Right.
and you see all these networks coming out of the woodwork. I think Roku's going to be showing baseball games. I think Apple's sending I don't know how much money, Apple Plus to show games. So there's still a lot of money for sports sloshing around out there. And so that's the doom and gloom piece, which doesn't even seem that gloomy to me. And I don't see much doom. I think that it's much easier to make the case that it's thriving. I think there are more teams out there charging money for admission, maybe than ever in history. Now there was a peak back in the late 40s and early 50s when the minor leagues completely exploded, because people were back from the war. There was lots of money to spend, and there was no television yet. So aside from movies, if you wanted to go somewhere, cool off on a summer evening, baseball was your best option. And then TV sort of knocked the minor leagues down in the 50s, blah, blah, blah. We all know that story. But right now, and I haven't seen a count, but there's an incredible number of collegiate summer leagues, independent leagues, and then, of course, you have 120 affiliated minor league teams and the 30 major league teams. It's a lot of teams and a lot of people going to see those games. I think, too, the one thing that's been said, by the way, since the 1960s, at least, is that kids don't play baseball anymore. All right, this is not a new story.
Yeah.
Baseball has made a concerted effort under Manfred to involve kids in the game more. They had this thing called Play Ball Weekend. One weekend in June 14 to 16 this year. Every affiliated team, that's 120 minor league teams, are going to have, I'm sorry, half of them, because half of them won't be home. 60 minor league teams are going to have this event where kids show up and they get a free bat and ball, and they get to fool around and play. They have something called Pitch, Hit, and Run that's gotten very popular. They have various other initiatives. It all falls under the heading, I think, of the Play Ball initiative. And I don't know if we can believe all the numbers that MLB puts out, but they claim that they're engaging hundreds of thousands of kids in these programs every year, and that participation in bat and ball sports and all their different forms is up every year. So whether or not that all those kids become an audience for MLB in 10, 15 years, nobody knows for sure. But what we do know is that MLB is sinking some resources into this, and I think it works, at least to some degree. So I don't see the doom and the gloom.
The doom side. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, obviously there's some problems, but I think baseball's thriving. They're talking about expansion again,
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I would say about like the TV stuff, that will get figured out, because ultimately Major League Baseball could just come in and buy out these failed contracts. And look, who knew the market was going to change so fast? So we're making 30-year multi-billion-dollar projections. It's like, come in, make a deal. That's what happens in business all the time. We'll buy back the rights for this amount of money. You guys write it off, or bankruptcy, or whatever it's going to be. And Major League Baseball can just do its own broadcasting if it wants to, kind of like what the Cubs and Braves used to do. And then maybe they do sell out regionally again, some other form. But I'm not a businessman, but I mean, I can see that how this stuff goes is, they'll find a way to get that game out. I mean, and sell ads once the game's out there, because there's people watching.
And all these billionaires wouldn't be lining up to buy teams on the rare occasions they're available.
Yeah.
If their money people weren't telling them, you know what, it's a good investment, you'll be fine.
Yeah. It is a good investment, right? And that's the other things that we also lose sight of on the fan side, is that this is a business, and I'm pretty hard on the Twitter A's fans. I grew up loving the A's, so I'm an A's fan as well. But if there's not money coming in, not enough money coming in, then you have a budget, and businesses have to work on budgets. Sometimes in sports, for a time, you can be like, who cares about that? But at some point, you do have to balance the books. and make things work. And so it is hard for a team that is trying to sort of market out. And I don't know what your thoughts are on two-team markets, but there's always a big brother team and a little brother team in the two-team markets. And it seems to be, I don't know how the White Sox ever get out and get to where the Cubs are. I don't know how they do that. I don't know if it's even possible. It wasn't possible in the Bay for the A's and the Giants for a myriad reasons, not just John Fisher. There's a zillion reasons why. Will Clark hitting a ball up the middle in 89 and making the Giants something special off of Mitch Williams. That is one of the nails in the A's coffin. People don't realize that, but these things have a way of going in a direction. So I guess I'll ask you, like, what are your thoughts in general on those parts of the game where we're seeing things that are uncomfortable? Maybe the A's go to Vegas and they are a Major League Baseball team. Because if I'm selling tickets for Vegas, I'm selling it to every Midwest market and saying, your company, Morton Salt in Chicago, you guys need to have your box here so you can bring your clients in and do this because right now Wrigley is still a cold. It's still going to snow in Chicago, right? Because it always snows in May. So I don't know, what are your thoughts in general on all of these kinds of market things, and how do you revive a market? And do you have to deal with this at your level and like trying to help you say Walla Walla, I don't know. But, how do you get them off of their knees and to thrive? Because everybody, the more they thrive, the better the league does.
In my role, I have very little influence on the business side of things.
Okay.
And so I just sort of watch from a distance. And certainly anyone can go look at the reported attendance figures and they can realize which teams are thriving at the gate and which ones aren't. Yeah. And while I certainly have opinions about how things might be done differently, I rarely, if ever, share those, because the truth is that almost all of our owners have been incredibly successful in their chosen businesses. I mean, it's funny, we actually have at least 3 of our teams are owned by billionaires. So these are not, generally speaking, mom and pop operations. We have a couple of those too,
right.
But for the most part, these are incredibly successful business people who own our teams. And I am not all that successful, and I'm not a business person at all. So despite what I might have observed over the years, I don't typically share my opinions. I think that the situation in MLB is on the one hand, it's tremendously complicated because the number of dollars is so massive, and the stadium equation has gotten so complicated because now nobody has any interest in building a ballpark. Not interested. All anyone's interested in is building an entertainment district, which happens to have a ballpark in the middle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, is that because you need the entertainment district to survive, or is it because this is a better way to generate additional income? I don't know the answer to that question. I do think it's a shame when every effort isn't made to succeed in an existing market. And my personal opinion is that has not happened in Oakland.
Sure.
But, it's not my team. I haven't followed the ins and outs of all the negotiations closely. So maybe they've done everything they can. But I would just tell you that as a baseball fan, and not as a commissioner of a collegiate summer league, not as an analyst, as a fan, speaking hypothetically, if my team's owner was reportedly worth $3.6 billion, and what stood between the team leaving and staying was $250 million, I probably wouldn't have a great deal of sympathy for that owner. If he was not willing to make that additional investment. Again, not my team, not my money.
Sure.
Speaking hypothetically, I tend to wind up on the side of the fans who are emotionally invested in this team. I feel that's who I have the empathy for.
I've been messing around with the concept of understanding, because look, if you have 30 teams, half of the fan bases are below average. It's just how numbers work, right? And so, what do you do about that? How do you bolster the lower end so that if you're below average, it's great because you're way above, the overall trend of what the mean would be.
Right.
These kinds of things. And when I look at, and again, I'm hard on Oakland fans because the place where they finish in attendance throughout their entire 58-year history is primarily 11th, or the bottom quarter of the league in attendance. This is, Rob, the 88 104 win Jose Canseco 40-40 A's finished fourth in their division in attendance, right? That's pretty good, but it's nowhere near first. They've never drawn 3 million fans. And so there are some problems where we can look at the fan base and say, what's different? And it's not one thing. It's going to be a variety of things. And I don't know if baseball cares to look that much into these things, but how do you approach this multivariate problem? And I'm using all kinds of fancy terms, with something better than a single solution of we have to move or whatever it's going to be. Because I agree with you. Nobody wants to build ballparks anymore, yet everybody's getting new ballparks. And you and I are old enough to like, wait, like the Braves are on their fourth ballpark in my lifetime. That's a pretty high rate of overturn. Texas is on their third. I mean, maybe even their fourth. We build ballparks. I remember when the Cardinals were going to get their new Busch Stadium, and St. Louis is like, you know what? We're not going to pay for that. And they're like, it's good. Thanks. Because we're going to go to Southern Illinois. We're going to build over there. And they're like, oh, we found some money. And they, and so I don't know what we do about these things, but it seems that one of our problems is marketing to fan bases and getting them to. Did you hear me? Did you hear all that?
Yeah, except for the very last bit. Yep.
How do you market to people? Yeah, how do you get the fan base in these struggling markets to get over the hump? Because I do hold fans accountable in some ways, right?
I think the most troubling example is not Oakland, because I kind of understand why the Oakland fans haven't been there over the years. The ballpark wasn't nearly as much fun after they built Mount Davis for the Raiders.
Yeah.
They had a lousy owner in the 70s who was very off-putting, Charlie Finley. You're right, they have not drawn well through the great majority of their history. They did draw quite well for them in the late 80s when they were winning those championships. I think that in that year when they and the Giants were in the World Series in 89, I think both teams drew 2.5, 2.6 million, which was probably a record for the Giants and I'm sure a record for the A's. So when people say you can't, the market can't support two teams, well, it can if both of the teams are awesome, right? And have big stars.
Yeah.
I think there are two things that are pretty clear. Fans are unlikely to come to a ballpark that isn't friendly. For example, the A's Stadium, for various reasons. The stadium in St. Petersburg, which I've been to a game. I enjoyed it. It's kind of a freak show, but it doesn't feel like a baseball stadium, right?
It does not. Yeah.
And people will say, well, it's too hard to get to the stadium from Tampa, from Tampa across the bay, which is true. It's hard, but if you had which is what they want, a nice custom-built stadium for baseball in St. Petersburg, people would come. There are a lot of people who live on that side of the bay. People would make the extra effort to come from Tampa. Maybe not as many as you'd like, but anytime you build your stadium basically next to a giant body of water, you've just made things difficult for a lot of your potential fans, okay? Whether it's, the Bay Area in California, the Bay Area in Florida, I'm sure there are a few other examples.
Yeah.
The other thing that seems to be clear, and this does not speak well for baseball fans, but it's always been the case, at least for a long, long time, since the 70s probably, certainly the 90s, is that if you broadcast to your fans that you're not willing to invest in your team, many of them aren't going to be interested in showing up. It doesn't matter how many games you win. The Rays have proved that time and time again, as have the A's. If the Rays go out this next winter, and sign the top 2 free agents on the market, I can guarantee you their ticket sales will go up by a significant percentage, 10, 15, 20, whatever it is. We've seen that with every time that the Padres go on one of their spending sprees, ticket sales go way up. They don't have to win a World Series. They haven't even been that competitive. Yeah, they've been in the playoffs a few times in the last 10 years, but I think, at least just in terms of a simple metric, wins and playoff wins or series wins, the Padres have not done that well on the field.
No,
but because they
right,
continue to spend gobs of money every winter, the fans are excited. And Bill Veeck made this observation, whatever it is, 80 years ago now. You can't, for your business, you can't rely on baseball fans. There aren't enough of them. You need people who just want to be part of something exciting, something that ties into a civic spirit. And the best way to do that, since free agency, like it or not, is to go out and spend a ton of money on free agents. That's what drives these days ticket sales. Winning, yes. Win the World Series, of course. Build a new ballpark, for 2 or 3 years. But if you're not out there competing for the best players year in, year out, you're not going to do well. Now, I will grant you, here's an exception. The Orioles attendance turned around real fast when they started winning, even before they started spending money last year, basically. Actually, it was the summer before, summer of 2022, when it looked like things were turning around, and they brought up Adley Rutschman from the minor leagues. The crowds went up immediately, and they've been up since. Now, it might be different in a place like Baltimore with their tradition. I don't know. But it's a tough sell in a place like St. Petersburg, where there's no real history of winning World Series, and you're nickel and diming everything. And even though you're winning 85 to 90 games every year, people just don't get excited about that.
As a guy I talked to, an A's fan, and his name's Todd, and he's looked at some of the correlations, and for sure, dollars spent, according to his numbers, it's like a 0.8 correlation, which is it's enormous, you know. And so, winning has a correlation, but it's lower, and it's a good. I think it's like 0.6, you know. But there's other things that I think that go into these problems, and I think this is just a thought that the obsession with data and how we value players has created a gap between, like I tell my angry A's friends, I'm like, hey, look, they made a movie and wrote a book about how insanely innovative your team was, and they hate it. Like, it doesn't work, and they get mad about it, right? And so they take young, controllable players, they trade them for more prospects to reload, and they manage to be competitive. But that has, among a lot of other things, that has distanced them from their fan base, because they don't want to see Josh Donaldson leaving really crush that fan base. So like, no, now it's time to invest. And the team would say, we can't invest what we don't have. And they probably have legitimate reason to say that. We don't have open books because you don't have that for anybody. But there is that thing with data where what they want to do and what is smart may not be smart for the fan base, for the business.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, all of those things are true, but what's interesting is that there's another data piece that is rarely talked about when people are analyzing the game, the wins and the losses. But and I only know this because I've been to a couple of these things, when you attend these analytics conferences, there's a whole section of discussions of the business analytics, right? So we always talk about performance analytics, player performance, team performance.
But
there's also business analytics. And I guarantee you there's somebody out there who can make the case. And I think people have even done this in places like Baseball Prospectus, which is mostly about performance, but they also do some stuff with the attendance. And I'm pretty sure the analytics will. There's a whole body of work tying spending money to ticket sales. So I don't. This is not revolutionary stuff. It's been probably at least a decade that the people have been doing real studies, and every organization, every major sports organization, has not only data analysts in their baseball operations department, but also in their business operations department. So the Oakland A's and the Tampa Bay Rays, they should know as well as anyone that if you invest in your talent, you will have a return in ticket sales.
Right.
Now, it might be that their analysts are saying it doesn't justify doing
Don't
that.
do it.
I think the Padres would argue otherwise.
And are those comparable situations too?
Right, exactly. Will you have the same return on your investment one place or the other? The answer probably is no. But when is the last time that the Rays or the A's signed a premier free agent? I can't even think of a time.
It doesn't exist. No,
I can't
there's
think of
nothing
when that
significant.
happened.
Right.
I know that the A's in whatever year it was either 2014 or 15 that the A's got off to this incredible start, and then in the middle of the season they went out and picked up 2 premier starting pitchers. They traded for them because they thought their pitching wasn't good enough, which it probably wasn't. But the team tanked the second half of the season, even though the pitchers they got were good. It was just one of those bizarre things. And then they gave up a big late lead to the Royals in the wild card game. So they didn't invest in free agents. They did spend a little more money because they had to pay those guys, I think. They gave up some prospects, but neither one of those teams has ever even tried to go out and supplement their young core with 1 or 2 big free agents. I mean, what happens with just as an example, would Ronald Acuna Jr. or Juan Soto, would guys like that, young guys, would they sign with the Rays? And if they did sign with the Rays for the market rate, would that money be returned to the Rays in ticket sales? I don't know. I don't think they know. They've never tried.
Yeah.
The one thing that the one argument I will mention though, Joe Sheehan's always complaining about. For those who don't know, Joe Sheehan has been writing about baseball for as long as I have, 30 some years, and has a real popular email newsletter. But Joe's always complaining that teams complain that poor teams complain they can't afford to spend on free agents when those poor teams are all owned by billionaires and nobody's losing money. And I agree with those parts. But my response has always been to Joe and publicly, just in general, is you want your team to spend more money. I get it. But the truth is, every winter there aren't enough free agents for everybody to sign one, a good one.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So you've got 2 or 3 teams every winter that are aggressive, and they scoop up most of the top guys. And then after that, the point of diminishing returns comes real fast because the guys who are left are expensive and aren't going to do much to help get you over the hump. So they can't all be the Padres. There's really only room for 1 or 2 teams to do what the Padres do. So I can't really complain that much, but it would be nice to occasionally see one of those teams that doesn't spend money. Just try it. See if you can invigorate your fan base. Maybe that's the year that it works, and you go to the playoffs, and you create 10,000 new baseball fans in your market. Who knows?
Yeah. It's such a complex and hard thing. And again, I'm hard on the fans sometimes, but you're right. The owners, you hate to spend someone else's money, but and are you marketable? I don't think that Acuna or Soto would sign with the Rays, and certainly not Oakland. I mean, maybe once they're in Vegas, that's a different story, maybe. But just to be marketable, and that is a competition. And like you said, there's go out and get whoever it is. Let's say, and we'll use someone who's long retired. You go out and you sign Casey Blake to get the last couple of years of his career, and you give him a what he deserves for a contract. It just doesn't work out.
Right.
You know, he whatever. Let's say he breaks
Anthony
his forearm,
Rendon.
and yeah. Or Prince Fielder. You know, like these are guys that were top tier guys, and you look around, you're like, well, that didn't work. How many more times can you try that? And it's easy to spend TV revenue money, but like, oh well, don't forget, we're still paying Prince to not be here. You know, and it's
You know, for the most part, teams
like
are
right
not
now. If you and I
making those
made a
deals
list
anymore, especially for hitters.
right.
You're not. I don't think we're
Yeah.
going to see the Albert Pujols deal again. You know, who was the Brewers have the Brewers are playing a tiny market. I think it's the smallest in the majors. It's either them, Cincinnati, or Kansas City.
Right.
And yet they're competitive year in, year out. They've invested. They haven't gone out and signed big-time free agents, but they signed Christian Yelich to a long-term deal to keep him. Or maybe it was to sign him. I can't remember now.
Yeah.
He's tanked. Hasn't been good the last 2 years.
No.
Braun, what's his first name?
Ryan Braun.
Ryan Braun his contract was a disaster. They gave him a massive deal to keep him. So what's amazing about the Brewers, it's a real testament to their ownership group, is that or groups, maybe they've had two now in the last 10 years, is that they've wasted all this money and still been competitive. That's really hard to do with a payroll like theirs in a market like theirs.
And
I
they
don't
want a
think
brand
get
new,
nearly enough
new
credit for doing
stadium.
what they've done. Right. They want a new stadium, sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's super complex. And then I think the Twins are a good parallel, I think, with the A's, because they struggled for such a long time to find a place to put a ballpark, and ultimately, kind of like the Rays, compromised and just said, we're going to put it in this best of the worst options ballpark. And look, by all accounts, it's a great place to play. But they have, when they have performed well, they outperform the A's in terms of attendance.
Mm-hmm.
They just kind of like the Orioles. They just idle higher than the A's do, because the A's idle at the bottom of the league. And so there's, I guess, maybe a belief that it would work. I kind of see this about Oakland too. I'm just going to be hard on the Giants. Barely got their stadium. They barely stayed in the Bay, and they barely get the stadium because in California here, we'll sue the shit out of ourselves fighting over progress. Like we're a very progressive state, except for when it comes to building trains or getting things done on the long coastline. It's very hard to do that. So if someone does buy the A's and tries to keep them in Oakland, you're looking at like a $12 billion investment. You know, this is Pete's bad math, but to reinvigorate the team, to build a stadium, to pay all the things you have to pay, it's a toxic dump. And I'm not saying that because Oakland is a dump. I'm saying that because it is a port that has all kinds of stuff. And here in California, that is expensive.
Right.
I don't know how they fix stuff like that. I don't know how they deal with. You couldn't build it in San Jose.
I mean, that's a larger issue that affects the whole country, but especially some particular states. It's just difficult to build because we've created so much red tape, and for the most part, that red tape, in my opinion, has been created with good intentions, i.e. to make things safer and give all the stakeholders input. But ultimately, if it keeps you from doing the things that people actually want, then you've made a mistake. And there's Ezra Klein has a podcast at the New York Times, and this is one of his. He's actually finishing up a book on this exact subject. Why is it so difficult to build things and in America, and how do we fix it? And I don't know what the answers are, but it certainly has had an impact on stadium construction as well, because the expenses are massive, and it's so easy to. I think the real issue, as near as Ezra, I've been able to glean from Ezra, is that with good intentions, people created these environmental reviews back in the 1970s. And that process has turned into something that it was not intended to become. So things just getting clearance to build something takes 2 or 3 times longer than anyone ever wanted it to, regardless of which side they were on.
Yeah. if it's even possible. Like here I'm sitting in the Bay Area right now, and I live on a town that's just on the edge of the bay. It's beautiful. If your house is on the edge of the bay, you got to get a city permit, maybe Army Corps of Engineers permit. There's a bay commission that handles anything within 100 feet of the edge of the. I mean, it can take, and I'm not lying about this. It could take 8 years to get told no.
Right.
And now you're going to build a stadium. Oh man, just the lawsuits are waiting. And even when I went back into the archives and I read about the Giants when they were getting Pac-Bell, AT&T, whatever version of the park you want to call it, when they had approved the measure, there were sub-stories in the story like, well, we got the lawsuits waiting. Here we come. And so they were able to get past that, right? But it's not easy. It's not easy. And so, yeah. Oh, what a hard thing.
Yes,
What,
it
so,
is. It's
yeah,
difficult to build anything, and it's frustrating. But I do think that ultimately, the way that, unfortunately, for better or worse, and I think oftentimes for worse, things will happen when a crisis is reached. But
yeah.
a baseball team is generally not considered a crisis, so that one might not get solved.
Yeah, yeah. What's your favorite thing about modern baseball right now?
Modern baseball. Well, this is it. I'm going to cheat. My favorite thing about modern baseball is that if you want, you can still experience it as old-time baseball. And I've probably said this before to you because it's something that I always come back to. But, and I know I'm going to sound like an old man, which I try not to do, but sometimes it's impossible not to sound like one. I am one. But I find Major League Baseball, for me, it's become visually disorienting as someone who grew up in the 1970s. And when I was a kid, there were no signs on outfield walls. There were a few, but they were rare. There were no advertising patches on uniforms. There were no signs behind the plate, showing you a sponsor. It was a simple, visually, it was a simple, relaxing thing to watch. And I just don't find it to be that way anymore. It's jarring. Having said all that, I listen to games every single day and night on the radio, well, on my phone, but the radio broadcasts. And they're exactly the same as they were when I was a kid. Exactly. 50 years ago, nothing has changed. The ads sound the same basically. When they play the local ads, it's great. You get to hear what the grocery store is in St. Petersburg or wherever. You don't have to see anything. You can just see it in your mind's eye, which to me is the best way to enjoy baseball anyway. So my favorite thing about modern baseball, and here's the modern part, is that thanks to smartphones, I can experience all 30 major league teams in my ears anytime I want. It's incredible. And with none of the visual stuff and the extra advertising and all the commercialization, I'm not naive enough to think that baseball has ever been pure or that the experience was pure, but I can go back to what seemed like something that seemed pure when I was 10 years old. And that gives me a lot of comfort. It's incredibly relaxing for me just to flip around on my iPhone and go, oh, that game's close and it's in the 8th inning. I like those broadcasters. John Miller's awesome. I'm just going to listen to John Miller for the next half hour. And it gives me so much pleasure. It's my favorite part of every summer.
Yeah, that is one of the very best things. And as much as I get mad at the MLB app, they're bound by their contracts. And so you can't show all of the games that you want to show. But when they have that little alert that says double no hitter, like it did 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, what? Double no hitter? Let me start watching that, So we definitely get to do that. And you can pick the TV broadcast possibly, or the radio. That is a real treat. I think, I love, so I'm a little bit biased because I got a project I'm working on. Hopefully, I'm going to get everything set up, and I'm going to do a documentary about the life of Felipe Alou. Everything's in motion, and it all appears that it's going to go forward. But like any kind of book you pitch or whatever, you're like everybody says yes until the checks start coming out, and then all of a sudden, people start. You know what I'm saying? But baseball is great. So the Corporate Social Responsibility Office at MLB, they're like, yeah, when you're ready, talk to us, Pete. And I'm like, I get to do that, And baseball is interested in getting these stories right. They're going to Rickland Field next month, to celebrate Willie Mays, remember the Negro Leagues, and they do so much of this stuff. And they're in, is it 3 countries this year play, or is it 4 internationally during the season? It's remarkable that they're doing all this stuff. And so baseball is like golf, it's wildly diverse. There is just so many different nations. And you think about people from Venezuela. Venezuela is a complex place. And so you're getting people from different villages and hamlets and all these kind of things that come out. And the game really has become a worldwide game.
No, you make a great point. That would have been very much less an old man thing that I could have said. And if you'd asked me that question 3 months ago, I might have been. It wasn't 3 months ago. It was, when was the World Baseball Classic? That was a year and a half ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Did we have it this spring or the previous spring? It was the previous spring, right?
Gosh, now I can't even remember now. Now you
it was
got me
definitely the
confused.
previous spring because Mike Trout and
because Ohtani
were
pitched.
still teammates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd asked me a year and a half ago, I might have come up with the correct answer, which is that baseball, because of the international aspect of it now, has become far more interesting on that level anyway than it's ever been. I think that it's funny, the way the game is played, I think is about as boring as it's ever been because of all the strikeouts and the fewer balls in play. You and I have talked about that. I wrote about it in my book extensively. And MLB is trying to do something about that. But as far as who plays it, you're absolutely right. It's fascinating. And I would argue that the greatest moment of the 2023 baseball season had nothing to do with MLB. It was that Trout-Ohtani matchup, which was, I think, one of the more exciting things I've ever seen as a fan on TV. Of course. But no, you're absolutely right. This outreach to all the different countries has really made the game, that part of the game, more interesting. And by the way, there are some tremendous international pitchers from Asia this spring. Seems like we've got more than we've ever had before. I don't know why. It might just be that they see more opportunities, and so they're more willing to come over here. But oh my gosh, some of the things that we're seeing these Japanese and Korean pitchers do is just phenomenal, and it makes it more fun.
Yeah, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but this is just such a great spot. I don't want to leave it yet. Also, because the competition off the field with the nerds is so high, you have to go out and develop new markets. And so there are baseball academies starting up in Africa. There's programs to get kids throwing in India. They're like, hey, we got to go and find a new place to get players from because, it's like we talked about earlier, the pickings are slim. These are great players. So I want to talk about that, and then I want to layer this in, and then I'm going to leave you alone. Walker Buehler just threw his first start on his third elbow, and so I'm thinking, what's the over/under on how many starts he gets? Because Ohtani got about 80 out of his second elbow, right?
Right.
And so, and I'm being a little bit flip, but I'm also being serious. Like at some point, someone with their fourth Tommy John is going to start a game, and I don't know how long Walker Buehler can throw the ball and either be relevant in baseball or until he tears his third elbow up. And I don't know if that's good for the game. I have the first clue what to do about it. But Joe Blanton didn't have to throw that hard to get people out. Jamie Moyer didn't. Maybe they were exceptional, but we'd have to figure something else out. What are your thoughts on third and fourth elbow type pitchers?
I think it's disheartening for any pitcher to have to suffer through all of that. The pain, disappointment, the recovery, the uncertainty. Will I come back? Most pitchers now, they do come back from their first, even their second Tommy John. It's not necessarily true that they'll come back and be just as good. There was for a while even a myth that pitchers typically came back better, which isn't true, but it got floated out there for a while and a lot of people believed it. I don't think it, for me, again, speaking as a fan, leaving aside the business piece of it, as a fan, I find it disheartening to think that my favorite players, or the ones who I enjoy watching the most, that I'm most impressed by their talent, that they are naturally going to be badly injured. I don't think that's acceptable. I think if that's your system, you got to find a new system. And from a business perspective, there is a belief, I don't know if it's borne out by any real analysis, but there is a belief within Major League Baseball that fans would rather see Tom Seaver for 35 starts 10 years in a row than Tom Seaver for 28 starts 3 years and then take a year and a half off and then come back and throw 20. I mean, and it happens again and again and again. When's the last time we had a pitcher who threw, I could look this up, who made 30 starts 5 years in a row? I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. No, right. Yeah.
Right? Let alone throw 200.
Or if you go 120 pitches to get him. Sorry, I didn't want to jump on you.
Right. No. You're right. We want to see the most talented players on the field for as long as possible. And for pitchers, that's why we have the Buster Posey rule, right? So Buster Posey doesn't spend half the season recovering from a broken leg. Okay? That's why we have the new slide rules at second base, so that we don't see a second baseman's leg get broken. There's
the Chase Utley rule.
The Chase Utley rule, exactly. Exactly. And I was in favor of those rules, vehemently in favor of them, because as a fan, I want to see the best players on the field. Do I miss the home plate collisions? Sure, those were fun too. It's more fun to watch Buster Posey than see a home plate collision, in my opinion. As a fan. And I think that from a business perspective, if you're a major league team, you'd rather see Buster Posey in your uniform, right? Than so anyway, all those same ideas apply to pitchers. The problem is it's not as stark as Buster Posey's injury was. The solution is not as simple as Buster Posey's injury was. Buster Posey's injury, okay, we'll talk about it for 3 years, and then we'll make a rule, and those will go away, which they basically have. Yes. And by the way, guess what? It's actually more entertaining for me to watch a catcher have to figure out where to set up and a runner figure out exactly where to slide than it was to see the catcher just stand in front of the plate and then see somebody run into him. It's you see more what I call a baseball play. Well, you could have the same thing, I think, for pitchers. Okay. One thing that's been floated with pitchers, and my friend Owen King wrote about this on Substack a few weeks ago. People can look it up. He called them, what did he call them? He called them speedies. For every 10 pitches, you're allowed one speedy. A speedy is a pitch more than 95 miles an hour, or 97, or whatever you want, wherever you want to set the number. And if you use your speedy, you don't have any more for the next until you get to the 10 pitch limit. And if you throw faster than that with one of those, then it's a ball automatically, unless it gets hit, unless it's a base hit or whatever. You can do the same thing with spin rate. The reason we have all the injuries, it's because I think most people would agree who have studied this, is that pitchers are throwing max effort every pitch, right? Who's the Braves pitcher who just got hurt? And he basically said 100%. They said, how often do you throw max effort? He said every pitch, all pitches.
Every pitch.
100%. People think it's because they're throwing as hard as they can. Yes. Guess what else they're doing? they're gripping the ball as hard
Yep.
as they can so they can get the
Yep.
spin rate as high as
Yep.
they can.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a study, but I think there's an assumption now that both of those things,
Yep.
the speed of your arm and the torque on your elbow and the spin that you're putting on the ball with your fingers, the grip strength, that's probably a factor too. And they're all maximizing everything, every pitch. And the result of that seems to be tearing elbow ligaments. It doesn't matter what your mechanics are or who you are, you're probably going to tear the elbow ligament. And I think baseball wants to figure out a way to stop that from happening, not because they sympathize with the pitchers. Not many people are sympathizing with, especially the guys making $20 million a year, but it seems to be bad business to lose your best starting pitchers year in, year out. Right?
Yeah.
Think how much, as popular as the Dodgers are, as much fun as Shohei Ohtani is, how much more fun is he when he can go out there every fifth day and throw 7 innings? I mean, and he can't do it and might never do it again. Who knows?
Yeah, all the things you said. By the way, I'm proud to say you and I have had this conversation. I was the one that said, hey, maybe there's a speed limit, right? A speedy, whatever, however. But, you can break 100 miles an hour 4 times a game.
Well, you know what?
I know
It's
for
crazy
sure
when you said it, however many years ago that was. But I'm willing to bet you good money that within 3 or 4 years, you're going to hear a lot of serious conversations by people who actually can make it happen, theoretically, of doing something like that.
I don't have the TrackMan data in front of me, but I promise if you're throwing a $103, because nobody throws a $103 for too long, like if you do your freak exception, and if that ball moves 18 inches horizontally, not going to last. That guy is going to break. And so maybe there's a spin limit, and maybe there's a speed limit, and it's just a no pitch, just like in softball, no pitch.
Well, and one of the things people lament the technology. The technology is allowing pitchers to do some of those things. Because they can maximize their mechanics, at least for velocity, and their spin rates. But the technology also allows us to measure the speed of the pitches very precisely and measure the spin rate. So now you could set up these limits because you can measure them precisely. You couldn't do that 10 years ago because you didn't know exactly how hard guys were throwing or exactly what their spin rate was. Now you do.
Yeah, I love it, man. Well, listen, super awesome. I don't want to keep you anymore. I really, really enjoyed it, and honestly, it's just such a treat to chat with you about all this stuff. So I just thank you. Is there anything you want to say in closing?
Oh gosh, well, I'll plug the West Coast League. We just began releasing a series of truly awesome video pieces, short video pieces, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes long, featuring West Coast League alumni who are now in the major leagues, talking about their growth as players in the West Coast League. And leaving aside that it's the West Coast League, they're just really wonderfully produced. I think you would appreciate them.
I'll watch it for sure.
Our filmmaker just is an amazingly talented guy, and I really enjoyed being a small part of that process. And I should also mention that you ask the best questions. I've done 1 million radio shows and podcasts over the last however many years, and you always come to the table with great questions that no one's ever asked me before, which makes it just a blast for me to do it. So thank you so much.
That warms my heart. Thanks, man. I'm going to run these credits. I'll say goodbye to you proper like in a second. Hold on.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.